Welcome to the Charlotte CBMC Podcast, a series of candid conversations with area business and professional men. In this series, you'll hear how CBMC has connected businessmen to God, His Word, and each other, equipped them to grow and become godly leaders at work, in their community, and at home. Now, let's join our host for this episode of the Charlotte CBMC Podcast. Welcome to the Charlotte CBMC Podcast. I'm the guest host, Phil Erhardt, and producer of the Charlotte CBMC Podcast. I am the managing director of PW Erhardt Media and a video production company and podcast producer. But mostly I work for the Lord because the Lord gave me this company, and this is what I'm doing. And we're talking with Bob Barton. Bob Barton is one of the regular hosts on Charlotte CBMC Podcast. Welcome back, Bob.
Thank you, Phil. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we've had some interesting conversations about Bob came to Christ when he was 16, and we had similar situations growing up. He went to college, was discipled by a gentleman there, and who kind of goaded him into discipling to other men of his age, and then went to the Army, got out of the Army, went to work in the private sector for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, and then wound up becoming I guess an associate pastor at a church. Where is that, in Roanoke?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, in Roanoke. So
my first position was associate. Yeah.
Yeah. So now Bob and I both are in the secular world. We work, Bob works for, Bob, tell our listeners who you work for now.
Yeah. So I'm Chief Operations Officer for Hobart Wealth. It's a private independent wealth management firm in Ballantyne.
One of the organizations that Bob and I have been involved with is Christian Businessmen's Connection, CBMC. And CBMC's mission is to disciple to men where they are. And they've been doing this since 1930, shortly after the market crash. A couple hundred guys got together in Chicago, saw their friends and business associates just total despair, where they've lost everything. And they got together and decided to have a Christian businessmen's convention. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the week, they had over 800 guys going, okay, now what's next? And from that, CBMC was born. And CBMC, for some of the who don't know, that is both a national and international ministry. I have a friend and a business associate in South Africa. He's a graphic designer, and he's also part of the same networking group that I'm a member of here in Charlotte. And he and I were talking one time, and I said, there's an office of CBMC in South Africa. And he goes, really? Where? And I gave him the address, and he goes, oh, that's right down the street from me. Yeah. So this is a national and international ministry. Bob, how long have you been a part of CBMC?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've only been in Charlotte I didn't know about CBMC till I came to Charlotte. I've been to Charlotte just under 7 years. So I heard about it. I think my first year here, met Bill, had gone to some of their events, and was involved in church ministry, was involved in other ministries here in the area, and just didn't feel I could spread myself any more thin. And it was about a year ago that I reached out to Bill, and I said, Bill, I'd like to help where I can. I just really feel the Lord, it's now the time, and that I want to jump on board and help where I can. I had become familiar with the organization. I had become familiar with their tools. And one of the things that really grabbed a hold of me so early on was two things. Number one, that reaching people in the workplace is an opportunity to reach people that we're probably never going to reach through normal church activities. Number one. Number two, and one of the reasons for that is not reaching them where they are, but reaching them through what likely is most important to them at this time. And then secondly, I loved the Operation Timothy discipleship curriculum. And it was just a very simple way with the app on the phone that you could encourage someone to begin reading God's word, learning God's word. You could begin meeting with them, discipling them, mentoring them. Just a really well packaged instrument for that vehicle, for that function.
Yeah, Charlotte, CBMC.com is where you can start by going to the CBMC advancement program. And the advancement program is a plethora of resources. I mean, you've got the attributes, which is a way of doing business, Operation Timothy, living proof, becoming a spiritual reproducer, as well as two peer advisory programs called one is called Trusted Advisors Forum, and the other is Young Professionals. And Bob and I have been, we are very familiar with a lot of these programs. But Bob, give us a kind of a 60,000-foot view of the Operation Timothy.
Yeah. So Paul ministered to Timothy. And Timothy was relatively young in the New Testament cultural setting to be serving as a leader in ministry the way that he was. And he struggled a bit. He had struggles like everybody else. I think he had some confidence struggles. I think he had some maturity struggles. He had some experiential lacks where he just hadn't been around the block so many times. And so Paul is taking young Timothy under his wing and frankly ministering to him and giving him counsel and giving him direction. And Second Timothy 2:2 is that favorite verse that I fell in love with back when, in the last episode, as I talked about me entering ministry, my senior pastor, I was brought on board to be an associate pastor. And my senior pastor said, I'm going to start something with you men. There were 6 of us, and he's going to call it 222. And he said, why do you think I call it 222? And when none of us knew, I was thinking, Phil, of the old TV program Room 222. But that was not it. It was Second Timothy 2:2, where Paul says, look, I'm going to teach you what I want you to pass on to other men. And it's that methodology of simply discipling. Phil, I didn't mention this before, but back when I was being discipled in college and being taught the whole methodology of discipleship, and frankly, the difference between evangelism and discipleship. By the way, most people, when they speak of evangelism, they go to the Great Commission. But the Great Commission is not an evangelism verse. The Great Commission is a discipleship verse. We're to make disciples of all nations. Witnessing was the first step to the objective of making disciples in all nations. And so what pastors have done and what Bible colleges have done is they've turned the Great Commission into a witnessing passage only. And we've taken off the end result. It's kind of like saying, we're going to develop an NFL team designed to make the best rookies in the world. That's our goal, to make the best rookies. Now, we would hope that would produce a good team, but the goal is not to win a Super Bowl. The goal is not to win a championship. The goal is to produce good rookie seasons. That would be a counterproductive goal, because there's more to it than that. And it's the same thing in the church today. And so he decided to begin to train us and disciple us. And I told in the last couple of sessions how someone did that with me in college. And at that time and in high school, someone always put me under their wing. And what someone told me along the way was, Jesus ministered for 33 years. Don't let the number of years in this story impact you too greatly. It's just kind of interesting. If we had our world population today, and Phil Erhardt was the only Christian on planet Earth, and God said, okay, my mission is failing. I'm changing the way I'm going to complete my mission. Phil, you're the only Christian on earth. I want you to pick one person, win them to the Lord, and disciple them to witness others, and take a year to do it. And then every year, each of you will do the same. So Phil finds me, he leads me to Christ, he disciples me. And at the end of the year, now the two of us are going to find two others. And if that was done that way, every person win and disciple one person a year, how long would it take to have disciples, every person on earth being a Christian disciple? It would happen in less than 34 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old penny. It's like, would you a penny a day for a year or $1 million?
Right. Now add that, Phil, to the fact that we're having and raising Christian children. So now we're training them and multiplying the effort. And this is why I think the early church reached virtually the entire globe. If you look at Pentecost and you look at people coming from all over the world on the day of Pentecost, and you look at 3,000 being converted and going back into their communities, it's very likely that every people group or region of the world at that time heard the gospel and was witnessed to, but we still are so far short in making disciples of all nations. And that's really what the Lord wants us to be doing. And so rather than everybody wanting to be a big speaker and speak to big crowds and big groups and build a big church, I've encouraged a few pastors I knew who were fretting that their church wasn't growing fast enough. And I said, Phil, to your point in our first episode, I said, Pastor, what would you think about picking your 12 best men and investing in them? Invest 70% of your time in those 12 men and encourage them to do the same. What do you think of that approach? And all of them discount it because it's not the way it's done today.
The Operation Timothy, I went through it with a gentleman, Doug Way, and yeah, it was about a year and a half. And we would spend time just just kind of just pouring through. We may get through half a chapter on
Right.
a good day. On some days we may have only get through one question and spend 2 hours just on this one question. The nice thing about Operation Timothy, it creates a hunger. And there's 3 volumes that you go through in Operation Timothy. And the first book is, the life questions. Book 2 is the life foundations, and book 3 is life perspectives. And that's how we go through things. You have to go through, you have to know what's in the book first. And then you
Yeah,
got to, find out what is that based on?
yeah. Yeah.
And then how does it apply to my life, and how
Yeah.
can what's my next step? And that next step is another program that we have. It's called Becoming a Spiritual Reproducer. And this is for more mature Christians, but it's a small group video based training series for those mature Christians, just to learn how to become a disciple maker. We've got the Operation Timothy. Once you get that, once you become a disciple maker, now you've got a tool that you can use in Operation Timothy. And that's a relatively new program that we've had. We've had it like for the last, I think, about 4 or 5, maybe 6 years old. But that one was another one. And then the other one is Living Proof. It's one of those programs that you kind of go through and you say, huh, okay, how can it talks about lifestyles and lifestyle evangelism. But it's a really cool program. But 2 programs that are probably closest to my heart are the programs where we gather like-minded men together. And the first one is Young Professionals.
Mhm.
And I think, Bob, you've spoken at a Young Professionals, haven't you?
I have, yes, sir.
What was your experience with those guys?
I have always, because when I was a young man, other men who were more seasoned than me poured into me. I've always had a natural inclination towards and a hunger for pouring into younger men. And when you find a young professional who is interested in hanging out with an old dude like me and just picking the brain, you know, Phil, when I interviewed you, I told this story. When I was in college, there was a guy who was a little older than me. His name's Chuck Fry. And Chuck, I saw as a godly young man. He was 2, 3 years older than me. And I wanted to be like Chuck. I just saw a maturity about him, a stability about him, a holiness about him. And I wanted to be like Chuck. And I said, okay, all I know to do if I want to be like Chuck is hang out with Chuck. And I hung out with Chuck and I got involved in his carpool to church. And I lost track of my guy the first Sunday we hit the campus. We arrive at church and I turn around and Chuck's gone. Of course, Chuck doesn't know I'm trying to follow him, right? And I'm like, where's Chuck? And I found Chuck in the back corner of a church where there's 2 or 3 70-some-year-old gray-haired guys sitting on a corner church pew talking. And Chuck standing right in front of them like this. And I walk up and I'm like, what's Chuck doing talking to these guys? And I said, I don't know, but if Chuck's doing it, I'm going to do it. And I sat there and stood next to Chuck, and it didn't take me long to figure out why Chuck was hanging out with those men, because they were pouring pearls of wisdom like nobody's business. And what I'm finding in our culture today, in the culture, Phil, of YouTube, and the culture of I can Google everything, there are a lot of young men who have never been taught to sit in the shadow of a more seasoned child of God and learn from him or her. And when they get a hold of that and they see the value in it, it's an exciting thing.
Yeah, it is. It is an exciting thing when you get yeah, our society is very narcissistic. I mean, it's all about me, all about what I can do, what I've done, where I've been. And in reality, it's like, it's more fun when you go do things with other people. There's great opportunities, not only for just learning, but just experiencing life. And I think when we get these programs, like Young Professionals, where we're pouring into, I mean, there's a lot of us out there. We remember our 20s and 30s. I'm 67, and I remember my 20s and 30s. I was not a nice guy. I was arrogant. I was a prima donna, and but what I would have loved to have an older, seasoned guy going, "Hey, let's get over, come here and talk." And that's
Yeah.
and I miss that. I think it's an essential thing that we all need. The
Well,
other the Go
you
ahead.
touched it later. You touched it earlier, Phil, on the application of God's word. What happens today, and this has happened from the beginning of time, I guess, people read this ancient book and they have every right to ask the question, what does this have to do with me today? And so you read a book that says that we're to meditate on God's law day and night. I'm sorry, but I'm not a monk. I'm not in a monastery. How in the what does it say? What does it mean? And how does it apply to my life? How do I build that into my life? 2 Corinthians 10:5, I'm to take every thought captive. Sounds great. How does that work itself out? Pray without ceasing. How does that work itself out? And what are these principles? And how do I live these out in the marketplace? And that's where someone who's bumped their shins along the way and learned a few things can really help us out, and give us a heads up. Now, listen, it's our call, it's our choice. Are we going to listen? We're going to follow, or do we want to learn it all on our own the hard way? We can go either direction. And the Lord will teach us both ways. but one's a whole lot less painful than the other.
It's interesting though. So we have that program for young professionals. We also have another program for more seasoned professionals. That's the Trusted Advisors Forum,
Mhm.
or TAF. And this is a program for business leaders, business owners, um, C-level uh, decision makers in the marketplace. And it's I'm a member of one. In fact, I'm going to be starting up one, hopefully, Lord willing, in the Ballantyne area. And it's where we sit down. We have a teaching that is related to doing business God's way. Because when you do it God's way, it's a lot easier.
Mhm.
The last few years in my business, I've come to the realization that, when you focus on the work, the reward comes a lot easier. When you focus on the money or the reward, the work becomes a lot harder because you're focused on the wrong thing. And sitting in with other seasoned business owners, and we get into, each meeting we have a featured business or two that talks about maybe they're going through a challenge. And because they're an entrepreneur, or maybe don't have a board of directors that they could talk to from a spiritual standpoint. That's what
Mhm.
TAF is. That's what Trusted Advisors Forum. In the last few minutes we have, I want to encourage you, everybody, to go to charlotte.cbmc.com. And when you click on the resources tab, you'll see in the second thing it says Marketplace Ambassador. Click on that. It'll ask you to create an account, and it's a free account. Don't worry, we're not going to sell your name and spam you with a whole bunch of stuff. But it just says you resolve that you want to make a difference as a marketplace ambassador, and you want to advance in this. And you click on the I resolve, you set up your account, and then you'll have access to all these free programs, the attributes, Operation Timothy, Living Proof, Becoming a Spiritual Reproducer, the peer advisory groups, Monday Manna, which is these are great daily devotionals, or weekly devotionals, excuse me. And it's a devotional that you can share with other workers. So we have a great program at CBMC. And Bob, I really appreciate you being part of the Charlotte CBMC podcast. And I know you've got some people lined up probably in the next few weeks that and months that will be able to hear from your circle of influence. And it's all about that, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Phil. Appreciate all you do. You do so much for this organization and for the kingdom of God, and we appreciate it.
Well, I want to thank our listeners and our viewers for taking this time to attend the Charlotte CBMC podcast. I encourage you again, go to charlotte.cbmc.com for all the free resources and to learn about the discipleship program, and also to connect with us. If you want more information about the organization, if you're looking for an organization that is Christian businessmen discipling to men in the marketplace, please reach out and contact us through that charlotte.cbmc.com. You can also listen to the podcast there, or you can download the Queen City Leaders app that is presented by Charlotte CBMC, and you can hear the podcast, plus listen to all the great messages that we've had from people like Casey Crawford, Coach Matt Doherty, and Mark Whitaker. For this Charlotte CBMC podcast, I'm Phil Erhardt, and I hope you have a wonderful day. We hope you were blessed and encouraged by this episode. For more information about Charlotte CBMC, simply type in the browser address line charlotte.cbmc.com. That's charlotte.cbmc.com. There you'll discover the free resources to deepen your faith, connect to one of the Area C3 groups that meet each week. Finally, you'll learn about Charlotte CBMC sponsored events like the Queen City Leaders Summit Series. Please subscribe to this podcast so you'll know when new episodes are available. Like and share this podcast with other men and help us spread the good news of Jesus Christ throughout the Queen City. Join us again next time for a new episode of the Charlotte CBMC Podcast. May you have a blessed and productive day working for the Lord. Thank you.